Okay, thanks for the introduction. And to be honest, I'm still completely blown away by the previous presentation. The world of professional medical appliances is an interesting one in itself. And it's great to see also how a tool like the iPhone has really upped the ante in that space. And I don't need to go through the company plug because I've been already introduced. You know Frog Design, Global Innovation Consultancy. Of course, we're happy to, there are colleagues also in the room, we're happy to chat about what we do and how we do it later on. I wanted to go back quickly, and actually it's funny because Star Trek was mentioned to this screen, which is, as some of you might know, people that are as old as me or Trekkies in the audience. It is what Dr. McCoy would see above patients in sickbay. But the interesting thing, and my favorite feature, is the one at the top corner up there, species humanoid. It also lived in a much smaller device. This looks like a little bit like a bag, but it's actually this small, probably the size of a smartphone these days. And as, again, Trekkies in the audience might know, what Dr. McCoy would do is he would pick up the little device at the bottom there, the scanner. He would kind of scan. That thing would make weird science fiction-esque from the 70s style sounds and lights. And then he would say something like, "This creature has 3 hearts, and the one in the center is beating out of sync with the other 2. And just like others, I always wondered, what the hell was he reading here that allowed him to make such a detailed analysis of the situation? And I think it is, in the end, down very much to magic. And what we just saw from a device like the iPhone does feel, to this day, like magic to people, to uninitiated people like me. Magic is, if you will, at the one end of the spectrum when it comes to medicine. At the other end of the spectrum sits statistics and sit a lot of facts. And I was at the beginning of December in London attending a mobile healthcare summit, a really interesting gathering of people like this one. And every single presenter started their talk with a lot of stats. And usually they were really depressing. Things like, in 4 years, up to 80% of the population is going to be over 80. And I was like, oh my God, in 4 years I have to age 40 years. But the point is that these stats are kind of dry. And I'm a silly designer. So what I made out of all those stats is that we need more apples and less doctors, or we need to shift attention from curing or from Medicure to Medicare. So it has to be more about prevention, and I think it was mentioned already at the beginning, we need to get people to change their behaviors. This is something that fascinates me as a designer, because I definitely subscribe to the philosophy that design starts from people and what they do. And I think also interestingly, it was mentioned that you need applications that fit within what people already do. So doctors are not necessarily against mHealth or technology, they're against technology that makes their life worse, that makes their work more complicated. And the same thing applies to people, of course. That's one of the design philosophy that we think we embody at Frog. So in the end, I'm always fascinated when it comes to change and bringing change, because designers, and I definitely see myself fitting that profile, see themselves as catalysts of change. So we always also get a little bit frustrated when we'd like people to embrace change and to change fast, and they don't. And again, it comes down to behavior. So how do you get people to change behaviors? Because it is true that when it comes to prevention and changing behavior so that you can take care of people rather than curing a problem down the road, which is, of course, also much more expensive, it is down very often to personal decisions, to actions, and to habits. So how can you get people to change their habits? I believe, like others, that it is a problem of awareness. And with that, without disturbing Buddhism too much, I just simply mean consciousness, always-on consciousness that our little decisions, that our little actions, accrued over time, make a difference, can make a huge difference. So let's do a little exercise for a second or two. Just put your hand over your heart and hear it beating. Well, I think just doing that has raised your level of awareness and attention to something that we usually take for granted. This thing, this muscle in the middle of our heart, or to the left of the middle of our chest, is actually beating, and beating as fast as it needs to support us in our daily activities. But that mechanism, bringing attention to something that we take for granted, has an impact. It usually changes the state of our heart specifically. It changes the state of the organism in return. It's called biofeedback. So what if we could apply this simple mechanism to our decisions, to our actions, to our habits? I will try quickly to delineate an opportunity area that's definitely taking place at the intersection of these four, let's call them components for lack of a better term. Data streams and access to them, sensors and cheap ubiquitous computing power, information visualization, and digitally mediated social networks. And I'll try quickly to touch upon these. You will hear some examples that were already made, and I'm hoping I'm not too boring in just repeating what others have actually said already. First, a little tale. I always loved comics, and I still do. And one of my favorites has always been Iron Man. And Iron Man, as some of you might know, is the super alter ego of pre-internet geek and billionaire Tony Stark. But what is seldom remembered is that Iron Man starts out with a man overcoming a disability through technology. So Tony Stark is kidnapped by terrorists, and in that process, he develops a heart condition. So in a cave somewhere, he kind of works on raw iron to create this metal chest plate that keeps him alive. And then the armor develops around the chest metal plate. But disability comes first, and disability is kind of an interesting and a bit awkward opportunity area, if you will, as we'll see later. In one of the most recent incarnations of the character and evolutions of the character, he injects himself with a serum that creates a little membrane on his bones, and he starts to integrate with his armor without any need for an interface. In a way, the integration between the man and the technology has become absolute. And in this page from the comic, you see him talking to one of his aides, who's warning him about incoming danger. Wait a second before you go out, you have to know this and that. And he dismisses her, saying, you know, I can see through satellites. I know this already. I can see it with my own eyes. Which is to say that he's now fully integrated with the technology, but in a way, he's not just relying on his natural senses to make decisions, as is literally going out of the door on a life-threatening mission. He's actually relying on a connection to a larger neural network of sorts that we would call today the internet. So where do these data sources, where does this information come from? Well, in this case, it comes from us. And again, I have a personal anecdote to illustrate what I mean. I have, for a long period of time, commuted from my hometown of Varese to Milano, where I work. It's about an hour-long drive, using a car, because I didn't have any other option. I'm currently taking the train, much more ecologically aware solution. And I've wondered many times, how many times have I been on this road? And there are at least 3 distinct systems, one of which is my mobile phone, that could provide a numerically exact answer to that question. But interestingly enough, I don't have access to them. So the first component of this new opportunity area is indeed access to our accumulated bit crumbs. And here I really mean accumulated over an extended period of time. And why? Because as we've already heard, we need to be able to mine them. We need to be able to go back to the data and extract meaning out of it. And to extract meaning out of it, of course, what we need to do is to create a way to make it tangible, to make it actionable. Here's where information visualization comes in. Again, a quick anecdote. The next time you have to take a taxi, try and make your choice to hop on a Toyota Prius. And then, after a few seconds, ask the driver, what is that display that you see up there in the middle of the dashboard? What usually follows is a very passionate story about how that very display has changed not only the way the driver drives, but the way the driver thinks about driving. And again, it is about awareness. It is turning an automated act, like driving, into a conscious activity. I can actually see in real time what's happening in the engine. In Iron Man's terms, if you will, I can see into my engine right now. And that fact alone is changing the way I think about driving, and it's changing my actions, and it's changing my habits. And at one point, of course, it goes back to being an automated task, but my habits have perpetually changed. Information visualization is a multidisciplinary design domain that is emerging in importance and relevance as we speak. This is, for example, the work of the MIT Sensible City Lab. And they detect, they're specifically active with mobile data traffic, they detect patterns. So the red mound that you see up there is just a concentration of calls. And I think this is actually coming from a football game in Rome. But it could be an accident on the freeway. So you could actually detect that something has happened just seeing all of a sudden a spike in traffic located in a specific location. Another great example coming from a talented group of designers called STEM in Design based in San Francisco. This is a project that showed at the MoMA last year called cab spotting. And it's basically the city of San Francisco seen through the eyes of GPS traces. So it's a living map of the city as the cars are producing it in real time. The one that is maybe a little bit dearer to my heart comes from 2000. Again, talented group of interaction designers and visual designers called Cuban Council. This is called Mood Stats. And they had this idea that they would create, at the time, a shockwave application that would track people's mood over time, so you could see patterns emerge again. And you could even compare those patterns with those of friends. Very, very kind of insightful for the time. We're talking about almost 10 years ago. And a much more well-known solution from Nike and Nike Plus. And these are all tools that, in the end, are not as maybe a bit more cab spotting or the work that's done at the Sensible City Lab at the MIT. These are not really artistic renditions of data sets. These are what I always like to call tools of self-reflection. So once I can produce data about myself, what I do day to day, I need to extract meaning out of it, and then I need to reflect upon it. Or I can be enabled, as we've heard also from the talk about patients like us, I can reflect upon what I do and see some of the patterns that I missed because my perception is limited, my senses are limited. And these are tools that actually support me or a community of people in my reflection. So where's the data coming from? I'll quickly go through these examples. It's coming again from our body and from these cheap sensors and cheap ubiquitous power that's put in our hands through gaming platforms like the Wii Vitality, soon to be compatible also with the Nintendo DS, just turns your biostats into a way to influence gameplay, for example. This is an MP3 player from Yamaha. It's called the Body Beat. And it has not a third earpiece for people with 3 ears. It actually has a little heart rate monitor that you clip to your ear, and it will sync up the beat of the music to the rhythm of your heart. So it's like a little bit of a self-reinforcing loop. The faster you run, the faster the tempo, which will influence you to go faster. Fitbit, which again has been quoted before, it's one of these life trackers, as they're started to be called. So it's basically an accelerometer-based sensor that you clip to your jeans or even to your underwear, and it tracks movement 24/7. It even tracks when you don't move, so it will tell you how many hours you've slept. It will turn that movement into calories or steps. And a similar solution from Philips, recently released, it's called Direct Life. And the interesting thing that it comes with a service attached to it. So you don't really pay, or you pay a minimal amount for the device itself. You actually pay for the coaching service that goes with it and for the fact that you can stay on the program and have access to your accrued data. But of course, this is a NEM health and healthcare setting, and there is a sector where all these schemas have clear financial incentives and have a reason to be that goes beyond the curiosity and goes beyond, the pleasure aspect. That sector is healthcare. For example, when it comes to glucose management systems, the new name of the game is called continuous monitoring rather than episodic monitoring. So rather than piercing a finger to draw blood and then detect the glucose, you have systems like the ones that are produced by Dexcom. And again, this is interesting. There's a sensor that patients themselves implant using that plastic thing that you see up there, and that sensor will beam constant information about glucose level in the blood to a meter, which again you see up there, and then the meter, not in this case, but in other cases, it talks and communicates directly to an insulin pump. So there's really no injection, no, again, drawing of blood. Life is made so much better for the end user. Proteus Biosmed, I think I saw a picture of this again in the first talk. Swallowable pills, same thing. Each pill does a specific thing, and it beams information, again, to an outside wearable device that then sends that information on, potentially to a mobile phone and a fake iPhone app, as you see up there. This is a project that's particularly dear to my heart because we did it in Milano at Frog Design. It's actually a EU-funded and region-funded research project we did with other partners. It's called eMonitors, and it started from extensive user research and let us kind of focus on cardiac patients as potentially the ones that would reap the best benefits. So it is a wearable reader that can detect medical-grade ECG, and then you can see a working prototype that's currently being tested, and the signal that we're getting out of it. That thing can be worn for, of course, days and days at a time, and it transmits data to a little device that you see worn on the shoulder up there that stores the data up to 5 days in case there's no outgoing connection, or otherwise it beams the data in real time to a mobile phone application that then beams the data up to the network. And this is, if you will, an emerging product service architecture. Something sensing that is either worn or even implanted in the body, talking to a device that sits outside, very often stores and amplifies the signal, or it talks directly to a mobile device, and that mobile device makes the data go the jump to the network. This kind of architecture has gotten people like Lee McGuire and commentators alike to say, what's happening when the device that stores your medical data is also the one that you use to update your social connections? It is your mobile phone in the end. And I think the answer to this question is fairly straightforward, maybe a bit simplistic. Your heartbeat, any biostat, any signal becomes, in the end, a conversation, or can sustain a conversation. But this answer raises an even more, at least in my opinion, interesting question in return. What is the nature of that conversation, sustained by sensors and sustained by cheap, ubiquitous computing power? Well, let me point again to a few examples. Again, I think I saw this up in the first presentation. Vitality makes the Glow Cap, which is a standard size for the US market pill bottle cap. And this cap can be programmed by a doctor or by a patient to basically remind the patient to take the medication. And then it tracks if the patient has been sticking to the regimen or not. And it publishes a report to the patient, to the doctor, but even to anybody you want. So you can send out a report about how regular you are in taking your medications. And I was talking to David Rose at Lyft, by the way, weird set of coincidences, who's the founder of this company and the CEO of the company, and he mentioned that they are working, or they might even have implemented by now, a Facebook application that shows not necessarily what you're taking, but if you are sticking to your intended daily dose of whatever medicine you're taking. And immediately when he said that, I thought, why would anybody want to do that? You know, privacy and all that stuff. But then at the same time, immediately afterwards, I also thought, of course, this is self-induced peer pressure. But it's also, in a way, artificially self-raising your level of awareness by raising other people's level of awareness about the fact that, yes, you are taking medications, so they might kind of become a little bit worried about what's on and come and contact you. And then you knowing that others know, is going to trigger this kind of sense of raised awareness around, am I taking good care of myself? Am I doing the right thing? And if you're not, others will ping you and say, what's up? You know, why aren't you taking your medication? Another, if you will, even more interesting or extreme example is another product created by Bayer. It's called the Digit. And it's a glucose management system for children or for youngsters. In this case, of course, if you will, the target group is particularly difficult in this case, because this is a life-disrupting set of activities that you need to, again, undertake. Pierce your finger, and moments where everybody's eating together, social scenarios, etc. So how do you get children, or how do you get youngsters to actually stick to something that is considered to be disruptive to their life? Well, in this case, Nintendo has gone an interesting, Bayer has gone down an interesting route. They've made their system compatible with the Nintendo gaming environment. So if you test regularly, the system will convert your behavior, if you will, into points that can be redeemed online to unlock game levels or even as currency in again, a social network a social software sort of scenario. And again, a little bit, as a father of two, a little bit discomforting, if you will. But if you set aside and you contemplate your discomfort for a second, you realize that in the end, the mechanic at work here is simple. This is turning what is known as virtuous behavior into social currency, which is to say, if we all agree, and hopefully we have an element of opt-in and opt-out, that we should behave in a certain way, then if I can prove to you, because of these data streams, that I am actually sticking to that behavior, that raises, in a way, my karma points, that raises my stature in the community. And I'll close with another example coming directly from Prague. This is an application that is going to be launched soon. It's called Tempted, and it's based exactly around the same idea. It is an iPhone application, as you can tell, and the idea is simple. If you want to quit smoking, say, or lose weight or whatever, and you're tempted at any point in time, you can call on your community of friends to give you a hand. And if they help you, their reputation is going to go up. And if you resist a temptation, then also your reputation in resisting temptation is going to go up. So before I thank you and bid goodbye, again, let me list quickly the 4 components of this opportunity area: social networks, digitally mediated social networks, data streams produced and tracked by sensors and cheap ubiquitous computing power, and information visualization to make sense of it and derive meaning from the data. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Fabio. I want to start off with my first question. You're talking about change in behavior. I can very well imagine that on a personal level, that being aware helps me to change my behavior. But what are the most important changes when you look at change of behavior on a more bigger level? So we as a group, as a society.
Well, the interesting thing I think about this kind of paradigm, let's call it that, is that if you consider going beyond also the healthcare or M-health, if you will, focus, it scales beautifully. So if you consider it more as a platform than a solution, imagine, for example, that all cars have a similar display to the one that you saw on the Prius, but it doesn't just show your consumption or it doesn't just show your statistics, it actually shows real-time accrued statistics from everybody driving around the city. How would that change your driving style? How would that drive maybe also just simple social-based competitive scenarios like I want to save more energy than the guy next door? What if this display was sitting in front of your doorstep as you're going out of the house and you actually can see how much carbon dioxide has been put into the atmosphere today, and you might decide, hey, I'm not going to drive today, I'm going to take another mean of transportation. So that collective dimension, I think, is definitely part of this scenario.
That's very easy. Well, it's relatively easy to project that on a car. What do you think on the M-health level?
I think the mechanics are there, and I think the answer was actually provided by patients like us. Those mechanics at work with a large number of people involved can be extremely powerful. I think in terms of motivation, what we're seeing, at least from evidence from the field, is that knowing the people that are in a way tracking you or supporting you or your peer group is very important. So it's not just about some stranger kind of knowing that I'm consuming this much energy or that I'm taking my medication. It's more like my loved ones. So that element of emotion and personal connection is key for an effective final solution.
So let's take a question from our audience. I have a small... Oh, Yuri has a question.
I have a small question. My name is Yuri. I'm following the DNA sequencing development, 23andMe, Halcyon Molecular. So in 2 years' time, we will be able to get our DNA for like 40 euros. If I look at your story and I extend it into the DNA area, that's coming quite fast, in my view. So what will it mean for identity, for self-consciousness, and especially for social networks? Will people share their DNA for DNA-based services in the future? What is your view on that?
Wow, I don't have a view on that, to be honest. I never thought about it. I think, all of these themes, everything that has been discussed today, and definitely this stuff, ties or definitely kind of touches privacy, identity, control over information, sociality, and how that's going to evolve in the next few years. I think you will have to try it out and see, because I think it was inconceivable until I don't know, a very short time ago to even imagine that somebody would share the level of detail information that you see on a site like patients like us. But when the benefit is high, people tend to go to extremes. So if it's a life and death scenario, yes, I'm willing to expose everything that I do, or everything that I consider to be most private, because I can reap such a huge benefit. And whether that trade-off is also going to be at work in the scenario that you describe, I'm guessing that might be the case, or maybe not. Maybe there will be areas that we'll define as untouchable, or as the insurance person in the room kind of pointed out as well, apologies for not remembering your name or not tracking where you are seated at the moment, who controls that information, who accesses that information is key. So the element here of reciprocity and, if you will, radical transparency, so I can see all of your data if you can show me, if I can see all of your data. That reciprocity needs to be there for some of these barriers to come down. If it's still a one-way street, you see all of my data and you base financial kind of calculations on the risk that I have to maybe develop cancer in my 60s. Okay, that's not a balanced or that's not a fair, if you will, business proposition.
I think you do have a view on this. So,
Anybody in the audience?
Very loose.
Well, I think looking at the time, you will have to move on to the next speaker. Fabio, again, thank you very much, and